All right, let's begin with this. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has challenged G20 leaders to use their influence to deal with global challenges. Guterres says this is a tipping point as the world battles with a myriad of problems like climate as well as conflicts. The UN chief spoke to the media on the sidelines of the G20 Leaders Summit in Rio De Janeiro in Brazil. South Africa is represented by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Pretoria will take over the G20 presidency from December 1st. And this, of course, as many are focusing on this particular summit to see if, in fact, it will then be able to, give us a sense of how they all plan to now deal with some of the big challenges that are plaguing the globe right now. So for a discussion, we're joined by SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena. Sophie, this is a huge moment, no doubt, for President Lula da Silva. Has he been able to really push for the interests of the developing nations?
I think he did. I looked at the President Ramaphosa's message or the statement behind closed doors, where he spoke about how South Africa is supporting President Lula, because when you look at the theme of the summit, it revolves around social inclusion and a fight against hunger. We know that the challenge of hunger and poverty and unemployment, it is challenges that are currently being experienced in the developing nations, the South. And therefore, he was able to really do that. But secondly, you'd recall that yesterday he invited the civil society the last past 2 days to the build-up of this summit of leaders. Civil society was there and also to make contributions, and therefore President Lula's input to the summit will take into consideration what the civil society in these countries are saying, and therefore the issue of inclusion, the issue of poverty, unemployment, and the just world is the main crux of what these people, or are the main crux of what these leaders will be grappling with. And I think with the president of South Africa as the incoming president of the G20 in, later this year or on the 1st of December, he will then continue with that theme. As you know, that even the UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, who's responsible for the development goals, has made a commitment that they will support South Africa to continue to champion the interest of the poorer nations and the developing South. And therefore, I think that partnership, moving from India, a South-South country, to Brazil, to South Africa, they are really speaking in one voice to really push for the interest of the developing nations.
And when you look at President Cyril Ramaphosa's statement further as well, deals with another huge issue, and that is the debt crisis that is faced by the African countries. And he's saying, I'm quoting here, that sub-Saharan Africa accounts for 67% of these people that are mentioned by the World Bank, nearly 700 million of them living in extreme poverty. And he says that economies are struggling when it comes to developing countries. There's declining investment as well as rising debt.
Yes, you are correct. The good thing, you have the UN chief, Antonio Guterres, there, the boss of the global organization or the world body. We know that he is pushing for the transformation of the financial system, and also to ensure that when you look at the World Bank and the IMF, the developing countries and poorer nations are properly represented in those multilateral institutions, so that the agenda of those institutions is also geared towards helping the developing and the poorer nations. You know that these institutions were established after the Second World War, and only those countries that were at the forefront of that war during the Second World War are benefiting mainly in terms of these multilateral financial institutions. They are the ones that are getting more, and they are the ones that are getting better treatment when you look at the loan payment or repayment, the interest for them. it's much easier, but the interest for developing countries and poorer countries, at times, they even exceed the GDPs of the developing and poorer countries. And therefore, these institutions, they have to transform. They are not relevant to the current challenges. When you look at how the world has changed, and also when you look at the United Nations, the member countries. And therefore, I think with the UN chief being there, the developing countries can count on Antonio Guterres, who is going to deliver a powerful message in relation to transformation of these institutions so that they can respond better, particularly in relation to the poorer countries. We saw that President Lula has also invited certain leaders from the continent. I saw the president of Nigeria, I saw the president of Tanzania being there, and therefore I think on the margins of this big gathering, you also have people who will be able to add their voice in terms of the interest of developing nations. And also on the table this time around, you have the African Union as a full member of the G20, and we know that all the time when the African Union is speaking, it doesn't only speak for Africans, but it does speak for developing countries as a whole. And that South-South partnership is very strong at this summit.
And of course, one then waits to even see what becomes the message, even just an agreement when it comes to geopolitics, just from this body alone. But Sophie, while there is, this taking place right now in Brazil, this key summit, there are developments in Mozambique as well. A lot of people concerned about what is taking place. The SADC summit as well, sitting to try and ensure that the crisis there is also dealt with. What's the latest there?
Well, yesterday we saw the diplomats and technocrats meeting in preparation for the summit of the foreign affairs ministers or ministers of international relations. But it was not promising yesterday. The utterances of a diplomat from Tanzania gave an impression that they are not serious about this matter. But just before I came in here, I saw an announcement from South Africa that the Deputy President of South Africa, Paul Mashatile, will join the Minister of Defense in Zimbabwe, Me Njimotsecha, to bring that strong voice from South Africa in terms of contributions, because the President is not able to attend the summit on the 20th because he will be traveling back from Rio de Janeiro. He can't even leave early because you know that President Lula, after closing, he has to hand over to President Ramaphosa ceremonially, even though officially South Africa will take over as the G20 president on the 1st of December, and therefore the president would want to stay until everything is concluded. But sending the deputy president now speaks to South Africa saying we really have to discuss the challenges facing the region. That is peace, security and politics. And you know South Africa has contributed a large contingent of troops in the DRC. They did the same in Mozambique, and you know very well that if Mozambique is not stable politically, security and defense, South Africa will pay a price because we are the neighbors. And you know that many people believe that South Africa is a better place for refuge, and that will put problems in terms of the resources of the country, and we'll continuously see the tension between those coming to South Africa and those who are citizens of this country. And therefore, I think sending the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa is saying we are taking the SADC summit very serious. And I think other leaders are going to do the same. And you have leaders already that we know that they are very firm and very objective. And I think as they engage on this situation in Mozambique, they will look at what's good for Mozambique in terms of stability, and prosperity to ensure that this region is relatively stable, because if Mozambique is not stable, the entire region will not be stable, and you can't talk about development.
And definitely, as economies are now also feeling the impact of what is taking place there. But thank you so much for that update. I appreciate it. And we'll be in conversation with Kate Fisher as well in the next hour, getting an update on the G20 Summit. That's SABC News International Editor Sophie Mokoena.